Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you. Hope you guys are enjoying this nice, cooler weather here that we're having in the Eastern U.S. I know it hasn't reached the Gulf Coast much this fall, but that will probably change as we get to the very end of October, beginning of November. I'm going to focus most of my video today talking about the tropics. Believe it or not, things are very busy across the entire world, several storms to track. As you might expect in an El Nino, but even the Atlantic is still seeing a very active season, one of our top five named storm seasons on record. Now it's possible we had busier seasons in the past, but the satellite data and aircraft data didn't support it. But nonetheless, one system that we've been tracking very carefully here, that is Hurricane Tammy. It is starting to take a more uncertain path and future and growing in size. And that is something we need to keep an eye on more closely here. So let's take a look here at my latest forecast. And we have a Category 1 storm north of the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, pulling away from those islands, but still producing locally heavy rain and surf. As this storm continues and making a right turn, it will probably strengthen some here in the next 2 to 3 days into Category 2 strength, but then should hit a spot where the water starts getting a little cooler and the wind shear starts picking up, and it will gradually, as it grows, weaken its core. And something we need to watch more carefully in Bermuda is a potential for it to hit a roadblock, and there's a small chance it continues on to the north and east, or there's a better chance that it turns to the left, and even somewhat of a chance it could stall near Bermuda towards the end of this week and towards the weekend, possibly escaping back to the east, but quite possibly continuing off to the west-southwest, and something we're going to have to keep an eye on in the Bahamas, maybe even the southeastern U.S. in the future. But what I am going to say, and I'll show you guys in a little bit, as this system, if it potentially does pull away from Bermuda and move west-southwestward, it's going to hit drier air and slightly cooler waters, so it may not be nearly as strong by the time it gets out here, but still something to keep an eye on. Meanwhile, we've got an area that could very quickly spin up into our next tropical storm. It's getting very close to the coast of Nicaragua, so it doesn't have a lot of time to do it, but it is in a favorable position with very warm waters in the Southwest Caribbean. So we're going to keep an eye on this invest here, 95L. Invest is basically an area of tropical moisture that has enough of a low-level center that has models being run on it. So tropical models are being run on it. It's an area of investigation. That's about it at this point, just a tropical disturbance. But something that may develop very slowly here into a depression or even a storm before making landfall by tomorrow. We now have a new tropical storm in the Pacific, Tropical Storm Otis, and believe it or not, several other storms across the world that I will touch on here in a little bit. Here's Hurricane Tammy now moving to the north. Let me refresh this here. I don't know why it didn't load. Here we go. Moving to the north at 10 miles per hour. So it's picked up a little bit more steam and speed. Winds are 80 miles per hour. And on this track, continuing to pull away from the Virgin Islands. And then here is our Invest AL95, now up to a 60% chance where there may very quickly be a tropical depression or even a low-end tropical storm before landfall tomorrow in less than 24 hours over southern Nicaragua. Very heavy rain coming to Central America. This actually may have a better chance of surviving once it moves into the Eastern Pacific later in the week. The next name on the list is Vince. So we're getting quickly to the end of the alphabet here. There's only two more names on the list. Let's take a look here at the wide view of the tropics, at least for the U.S. and Latin America here. And you can see Hurricane Tammy growing in size, very heavy rain falling on the southeastern side. So even though the storm has pulled away from Barbuda and Antigua and Anguilla and the Lesser Antilles, the Netherlands Antilles, we still see very heavy rain, unfortunately, for the next couple of days as that feed of moisture continues right on out of the deep south here from the central Atlantic. Here is our area to watch here off of Nicaragua, not very organized, but moving slowly and producing heavy rainfall. That's going to move inland as we get into the overnight hours tonight. And then here's our new tropical storm, Otis, and that has formed south of the Mexican Riviera. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Otis's future. We do have Norma, which is now getting ready to move inland. It has actually weakened significantly down to a tropical depression, but all that moisture streaming up into Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. The high clouds are actually all the way into Georgia and northern Florida from the subtropical jet that's driving Norma into Mexico. And you can see a big storm off the west coast here. This is going to drop east and southeast, not a tropical system, but something that's going to pull colder air down from western and central Canada and produce our first major winter storm across this region here in the next couple of days. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. In the east, we have some leftover moisture still raining over the maritime provinces of Canada, eastern Maine. It's going to be kind of an ugly, cool day here, but we are going to see this storm gradually pushing away and some nicer weather coming in the next couple of days. Let's take a look at the Caribbean. And you can see all three of our systems on the map that we are concerned with. This is Hurricane Norma, north of the Virgin Islands, pulling away to the north. It will eventually turn right and track more northeasterly here. As you can see, we've got flow out of the west aloft. That's where all these high clouds are streaming across the Gulf and over the Southwest Atlantic. Here's our invest to keep an eye on, 95L, getting closer to the coast of southern Nicaragua and northeastern Costa Rica. You actually see thunderstorms firing up with the same wave that's forming this low pressure on the Pacific side here, just offshore of Costa Rica, as well as over El Salvador and southwestern Honduras. Very heavy rain, but that is going to move off into the open waters. And then here's Otis, now a tropical storm spinning over the eastern Pacific, and that could be our fourth named system to affect Mexico in just a 2-week span. We had Tropical Storm Max formed in this area. At the same time, Hurricane Lydia strengthened rapidly and hit as a Category 4 up the coast. Then yesterday and the day before, Hurricane Norma came through Cabo San Lucas, weakened quickly over the Gulf and now in mainland Mexico. And this is Tropical Storm Otis that we're going to keep an eye on here more quickly. Behind Hurricane Tammy, you can see Tammy's creating a lot of wind shear. So we have a lot of moisture in place, kind of a trough here, but nothing showing any organization. So it's unlikely that we see development coming behind Tammy for the time being. After Tammy moves away, if there is something left over, I think we might want to keep an eye on it. But right now, we're starting to lose the possibility of something else forming. But if we do get Vince, then this one could be our W storm. So we'll just keep an eye on that. I think Wanda, I don't remember what the next storm name is. At this point, I'm kind of ready to move on from the tropics. So here's Tammy. This is the true color view, and you can see dry air circulating on the west side, wind shear still fairly low, so it's going to hold its own for a while. But the big thing you guys need to notice is that Tammy is growing in size. So as this track becomes more clear, we are going to see a larger area get impacted. A couple days ago, when it came up through Antigua and especially Bermuda, which had 90-mile-per-hour sustained winds briefly on the island, the storm had a very small core. Now that core is growing in size. So while it may not be a whole lot stronger than it was then, it is going to be growing in size and affecting some more portions of the ocean here. And here's a closer look at our infrared, and you can see still a pretty well-developed core. Not really an eye forming with this, but it may have the opportunity to strengthen a little bit more here over warmer water. And you can see it's in an area where ocean heat content is still fairly high. So the Hurricane Center is predicting it will strengthen some more here tomorrow and tomorrow night up to 90 miles per hour. I actually am showing it getting a little higher than that, up to 100. As you can see, there's still some pretty warm water, and I'm not as conservative as they are, but I do agree that it is going to turn back towards the left and weaken gradually, and maybe even become post-tropical somewhere in here near Bermuda. Whether or not it's tropical doesn't really matter to Bermuda. You're going to see gusty winds and some heavy rain potential here, depending on where this track goes. And there's a chance, and I'll show you some of the models go farther south of Bermuda, and we're starting to see that trend a little bit more to the south with a more severe curve to the left. But again, that's going to be about 4 or 5 days away. So there is some uncertainty in that. The key messages from Hurricane Tammy from the Hurricane Center: heavy rain is going to continue over the British Virgin Islands, Leeward Islands, and northern Windward Islands through this morning. And honestly, I think we're going to have some more heavy rain over the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and even eastern Puerto Rico beyond this time frame. So there could still be flooding. They don't even mention Bermuda on here, which I think is a little bit, I don't know, careless in my opinion. Not ripping on them, but I think we need to watch in Bermuda. Because as this system continues to grow, I think it's going to be a bigger threat to Bermuda, at least for the winds. Maybe not necessarily the strongest of the winds. Models still show a pretty decent chance it's going to turn back to the left. Only 2 models show it escaping to the right. Those are the HMON and the GFS models, which are not our strongest, most skilled models in the longer term. I tend to believe the HAFS tropical model here a little bit more. And you can see now the bulk of the models that do turn it left take it to the south of Bermuda. There are several ensembles that continue it towards the Bahamas and Florida as a weak system, maybe even into the southern Gulf. But at this point, I think it's going to be a skeleton of what we're dealing with now. I don't want to say a zombie storm. It may not be completely dead, but something that if it does try to cross Florida or even come down this direction, it's going to have a hard time regenerating into what it is now, in my opinion. Doesn't mean we don't need to watch it, just means I think it's less likely to become a major threat. You can see the European ensemble control member turns it to the left, takes it near just south of Bermuda here. The purple line is the deterministic. Both of them are about 100 miles to 200 miles south of Bermuda. The majority of the ensemble guidance either does a loop here and turns it back out or continues it more to the west-southwest. It's going to hit a fork in the road where there's going to be a trough off to the north and west of it and a ridge blocking it to the north and east. And the big question mark is, does that trough pick it up and turn it left? Or does the trough pull away and eventually it gets an opportunity to follow that trough away to the north and east? And I don't know the exact answer to that. Although right now my projection is I like this trend that has it getting blocked by the ridge, missing the trough, and trying to find a way back into here. It will be a weaker system, though, at that point. You can see there's nothing showing this getting to major hurricane status, but several models showing Category 2 strength here, probably by Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, then gradual weakening. Most of the models show it a tropical storm, though, by the time it gets to Friday and Saturday and gets potentially close to Bermuda. So that is some encouraging news. Here's a look at the HAFS tropical model. I apologize. This is the entire basin here. There's not a lot I can do about that. But you can see growing in size, moving to the northeast here. This is tomorrow night. Bermuda's right here, so we're south and east of Bermuda. The storm still grows and is a pretty formidable storm here on Wednesday. It may be at its strongest Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday night before making that turn. Then you can see there's some breakdown in the stronger winds on the southern side of this system, but winds are potentially ramping up in Bermuda Thursday night, early on Friday morning. We could see tropical storm force winds if this is correct. You can see the trough that's steering it is actually kind of down in here to the south and west of it. Here's the big ridge blocking it. You see these lighter colors. Those are weaker winds that obviously are going to keep the system from getting right into the middle of that. And then we see a steering to the left around this strong ridge of high pressure that builds right back into the eastern U.S. over next weekend. So this model says it's weakening, but it is carrying that west-southwesterly track about halfway between the Bahamas and Bermuda around midnight, Friday night, Saturday morning of this upcoming weekend. So we've got a lot of time to watch, but we certainly do need to watch. Here's the Icon model. This one's been the most consistent recently. It's not my favorite tropical model, but we do have to watch it. It's the German model. And you can see it's growing the storm system. It's starting to lose somewhat of its tropical characteristics by Thursday night. But look at these winds that are approaching Bermuda here later Thursday night. We do have winds potentially 40 to 50 miles per hour, especially just to the south of Bermuda. And then the storm continues off to the west-southwest. It's not looking super tropical, maybe kind of subtropical at this point, but it's far enough south where we do need to keep an eye on it here in the Bahamas. Notice the winds do die down. At this point, it's maybe a minimal tropical storm or even just an extra tropical storm with 40-mile-per-hour wind. But the winds are picking up here on the east coast of Florida later this weekend and early on Monday. This actually has a landfall somewhere near West Palm Beach. But again, it's a much weaker system. So I would not get too carried away in Florida at this point. Just keep an eye on things. Same for the Bahamas. Bermuda, I think you have some bigger potential challenges, but there's still a chance this could also do a loop and turn away, which is what the European model is trying to show over here. Or may even die around Halloween, so or next Monday, next Tuesday. So keep an eye on it, but certainly a lot can still change. Here's a look at why that may happen. Here's the European model. You can see it's in a pretty favorable spot right now to grow and strengthen, but you see this giant area of brown colors. That indicates much drier air aloft. And what's going to happen here is that drier air is going to eventually start to erode the circulation here. You can see a ton of dry air coming down. That's what's going to keep the system from strengthening, even if it turns back to the left. There's just way too much dry air, and that is not favorable for a tropical system, especially later in October. We need to see more moisture in place. Unfortunately, for the life of Tammy, I don't think that's going to be the case. Here you can see our upper level low cuts off. Here's Tammy. It kind of gets slingshot around Bermuda here on Friday. And again, not very favorable, but you can see there is a good moisture feed behind it. So if it does get back down into here, it may have a better chance of trying to regenerate early next week. So a lot of uncertainty right now, still way too much time on our plates to try to figure out exactly where it's going to go. Here's Invest 95L. Apologize for the satellite loop here from tropicaltidbits.com. You can see it's got a pretty decent spin with it. The wind speeds are actually not far from tropical strength, but it's running out of real estate. So a very favorable area here, bathwater for this to become tropical, but also unfavorable, the fact that we're almost on land, but we could see a quick spin up into a tropical depression or even tropical storm vents here. Models show any landfall is going to be in less than 24 hours over central coast of Nicaragua, and then generally speaking, a bend back to the left. Unfortunately for Central America, this is going to lead to flooding over portions of Nicaragua, over Honduras, especially southern Honduras, over El Salvador, over Guatemala, maybe even over southeastern Mexico, with this reemerging into the Pacific potentially here by Thursday or Thursday night. After that, we'll have to keep an eye and see if it tries to survive in the Pacific, which it seems like everything this time of the year is doing. It's going to wait for Otis, though, first before it can make its way through this area of the Pacific. I don't think it's going into the Gulf. Highly unlikely it's going to get up into here due to the fact that we are going to have northerly flow aloft, and that's going to keep the system from making much progress. The Pacific, we see now tropical depression Norma coming on shore, winds only 35 miles per hour. Now we've got Otis, tropical storm with 45 mile per hour winds. That's moving slowly northward. It's not moving very quickly right now in an area of weak steering. You can see Norma's pretty much fallen apart here, just a remnant low that's going to bring heavy rain up into portions of the south central United States. Then we see Tropical Storm Otis, which is beginning to grow in size and something we need to keep an eye on. I'm going to show you a little bit more of that in just a minute. And then here's our next area to keep an eye on off of Nicaragua. Maybe it becomes briefly a tropical storm. We'll have to see about that. Norma's looking naked in the center here. Unfortunately, she's exposed. This is great news for Mexico as it comes inland. There's still a heavy rain threat, but at least we're not dealing with damaging wind. And you can see it's going to die probably in the next 12 hours. So this time tomorrow, we're just going to see some remnant moisture. Here's a look, though, at Tropical Storm Otis. And it is growing in size and gradually strengthening here. It's going to hit some wind shear pretty soon, but for the time being, showing some signs of life here. Now, the future track of Otis does take it close to the Mexican Riviera, and some of the models take it inland here near Acapulco. So there is a tropical storm watch in place. However, there are several models that take it into here and kind of stall it just south. Looks like Otis could be sitting on the dock of the bay for some time here, wasting time before it gets kicked away to the west. So we're going to keep an eye on that for you guys here. Two other systems of note, really three, but two that I'm most concerned with. Tej, which is getting ready to make landfall in eastern Yemen, close to the Oman border. It is now weakening, but it was a severe storm, now hitting some dry air, still going to cause some flooding problems in Yemen. You can see the satellite image of it. It is starting to weaken as it comes close to landfall here in the next 12 hours. Oops. And then a more significant storm in the South Pacific, for those of you who may have family or friends or vacation in Vanuatu, this is our earliest cyclone in the South Pacific season in over 5 years, and a pretty significant one. Lola, now a Category 3 with winds of 130 miles per hour, expected to strengthen a little bit more and then hit some wind shear near Vanuatu. But this could be a damaging storm for these islands. You can see a large eye has now formed. This is the southern hemisphere, so things spin the other direction than what we're used to here in the northern hemisphere, but something we definitely need to keep an eye on as this eye is opening up and it's showing signs of a burst of intensification. So that's a look at the tropics. There's another area to keep an eye on in the Bay of Bengal, which will bring some heavy rain into eastern India here soon, but probably not developing into too much. Taking a look at the jet stream here, we've got a strong trough moving into the southwest and into northwestern Mexico. That's going to bring us potentially some storms and maybe a few heavier storms in two bursts, one over the south central U.S. here tomorrow and the other across the upper Midwest over the next couple of days. That's not really going to be a big severe weather maker, but it is going to bring some heavy rain with it. Bigger trough moving into the west here by Tuesday night and Wednesday, going to bring colder air down here from Western Canada into the northwest. And as that progresses eastward, it's going to flip the switch on this warm spell we're dealing with here in the central and eastern United States for the second half of this week into the weekend, and flip the switch by Halloween to much colder weather. As that change happens, we'll have to keep an eye on where the moisture transport is. You can see this big ridge right here, but we could be dealing with a little bit of severe weather over the plains and eventually even into the Great Lakes and parts of the Northeast. Look at how fast these winds aloft are, over 90 knots. That could produce some locally severe weather somewhere in this region as we get into early next week. Still some time for that to happen, but we're going to watch it closely for you guys. Here you can see moisture getting advected northeastward into the plains here tomorrow. And then that kind of falls apart when it hits the Great Lakes. Next wave here Wednesday could bring a little bit of severe weather into Oklahoma, central Texas, even southern Kansas. And here comes the cold weather with heavier snow expected over the northern Rockies, eventually moving into the northern plains by the time we get into Thursday morning. That's going to lift north and east into northern Quebec. As we look at the weekend, we do see, wait a second, take a picture here. If you're in the northeast, okay, there's a little rain, but we may escape here without much rain at all for the first time in, 6 weekends? So we'll keep an eye on that. But there's a boundary setting up here, some colder air slipping down through Maine. So it's possible we could get a little bit of rain here in upstate New York and northern Vermont. but we get closer to Boston and down to 95 quarter, it actually could be pretty nice here over the weekend before our front moves through. And then things are going to quickly flip here next week. Monday and Tuesday, big front moves through, much colder weather as we start the month of November. Here's a look at our severe weather threats. You can see there's a marginal risk near the Twin Cities into central Wisconsin for today. There could be a little bit of hail and strong winds. As we get to tomorrow, that area starts growing, but it's still in that area. We also see thunderstorms in southwest Texas and southeastern New Mexico. And then as we get to Wednesday, a marginal risk for severe weather west of 35. So basically the hill country up into the big sky country of Texas. And I think we could see a little bit of rougher weather as we get up later into this week into the central and then northern plains. Winter storm impacts could be pretty significant, though, over the Cascades, the Olympic Peninsula mountains, as well as especially the mountains of Montana and Wyoming here. And as we shift to the north central United States, that threat for winter storm weather grows across northwestern parts of North Dakota. And obviously the Canadian provinces are going to see significant snow. The ensembles show potentially over a foot for many places in the northern Rockies, as well as the Cascades. We also see potentially up to 2 feet here near the Tetons and potentially a foot here all the way into the U.S.-Canadian border in northern North Dakota. So winter is definitely coming. This storm still needs to be ironed out, but we will see significant snow in many places out of it. And then spreading east next week, we could see some of that snow picking up over northern Ontario and even some snow around the Twin Cities, northern Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, possibly even into Quebec and the northern mountains here of the Northeast, with the time frame being early next week. So that's what I'll be tracking for you guys, but I hope you all have a great Monday. I appreciate y'all's time. If you did enjoy this video, please consider becoming a subscriber if you haven't already. And if you are a subscriber, I do offer a membership, $9.99 a month, 33 cents a day if you feel led to support me a little bit more. And I will be obviously giving priority to those folks, faster responses, more long-range forecasts. Basically, whatever you want, I will be happy to answer that. Everybody else, I'll try to get to your comments, but I am going to admit I'm pretty busy during the day, and it might be a little bit tougher for me to do that. But I thank you all so much. You guys are the lifeblood of this channel. I'm not doing this for me. Honestly, I feel led by God to do this. I'm a Christian man. I give all the glory to God. He has given me this gift to share with you guys. He's also called me just to share the good news with you all. And I was a person who wasn't a believer until about 10 and a half years ago when things changed for me. And I got to a spot where I felt I was putting all my value and all my worth and how much money I was making, if I had a job, what I looked like. But that's not what I believe now that God wanted me to look at. He wanted to see the worth that he put in me and that I had a gift to do a lot more. I always have wanted to help people. I've always wanted to get in front of folks when it comes to the weather and help them be prepared. But now I feel like there's more passion and purpose than ever because God has called me to do this. Paul tells the church of Corinth, 2 Corinthians 12:9, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Just remember that when we're told that God's grace is sufficient, that means we don't have to try to do it all ourselves, that we're already forgiven for our sins. We're already forgiven for our weaknesses. God never made us all perfect. The only person he made perfect was Jesus Christ, who rose from the dead as a sacrifice, as a living sacrifice, so that we can live eternally and perfect when our time on earth is gone. We're not really growing here. We're not becoming new. We're not new creations. We are getting newer, but we're not new until we're in heaven with Jesus. So I wanted to share that good news with you guys because that's what I truly believe. If you don't believe that, that's all right, because I didn't for 30 years of my life. But I do pray, though, that you eventually see what I see in God and what he has created me to do. And maybe he's done the same for you and you just haven't acknowledged it yet. And that's quite all right. I'm happy to pray for you, whatever situation you're in. So I hope you all have a blessed Monday, and we'll chat again tomorrow morning with more updates coming on Tammy. Have a blessed day. See you guys tomorrow.